So this is an overview of ethnobotany and its ethical considerations. First off, ethnobotany is defined as the study of knowledge, skills, and daily use of plants that enable the people of a local community to get the most out of their environment. The purpose of this research is to improve people's understanding of the value of plant resources in different cultures. So how this started, this goes back to colonialism, and it's the exchange of different goods across the ocean called the Columbian Exchange that led conquistadors to learn about these different cultures and try to gain some economic profit. And it's important to consider how colonialism is still impacting how we practice ethnobotany today, and I'll talk more about that. Uh, an example of ethnobotanical knowledge is the Three Sisters polycropping, which is a way of sustainable farming that doesn't use any pesticides or um, fertilizer because the way the beans, maize, and squash interact mitigates um, and their negative responses to the soil. So the field today is very interdisciplinary. It ranges with economics, archaeology, medicine, pharmacy, botany. And because of that, there is no standard structure of the field. Um, but it's a rapidly growing field that requires a concrete methodology. So right now we have nonprofits like the Amazon Conservation Project and also education institutions like UW contributing and then building these organizations like the International Society for Ethnobiology. The ISC I point out because it has a international code of ethics, which the rest of this research has focused on boiling down some of the major ethical issues and ways we can address this. So I'll lay out three ethical issues first. The first is knowledge system misunderstanding. So bear with me, this one can be a little philosophical, but knowledge systems are defined as the language, values, and beliefs that shape how people of a culture understand themselves in their environment. And these differ for each cultures, and I'll generalize indigenous cultures and Western cultures and compare them with three examples. First off is the way we understand identity. In the Western culture, we have an anthropocentric understanding or human-centered focus and an individualistic society where we're very career focused and not very family oriented. In indigenous culture, it's more of a kin-centric understanding. They see plants as alive and plants as relatives, and they have a purpose as a stewardship towards the land. And knowledge sharing in the West, this is often about claiming ownership in the form of publications, intellectual property, and products. And in indigenous cultures, it's community owned. It's almost like a living entity uh, that's passed on through relationships, land-based practices, and shared experiential learning. And science differs as well. In the West, we typically have universal laws to be applied to science, and it's often isolated from religion and government in each country. But in indigenous practice, it's often ingrained in that culture. And these scientific studies have been tried and tested over millennia, and it's very specific to their place, their local ecosystem. Now, second is cultural appropriation. I listed three components to cultural appropriation. First is bioprospecting, which is identifying leads for the potential development of food and drugs that creates commercial exploitation. Bioprospecting can be good sometimes, but I'm mentioning it because there can be exploitation involved as well if not done respectfully. Biopiracy is usually never good. It's claiming patents, harvesting on land, and restricting the use by these indigenous cultures. And aping is the inappropriate or unacknowledged adoption of elements of one's culture by members of another culture. So two examples is one is the biopiracy of the Combo frog. This frog has medicinal value uh, for many indigenous cultures in Brazil, but it's recently been tried to be patented for its genetic material by 11 different countries that are all developed. A quote here to explain this is, "It's a new form of colonialism. The North has that power, that knowledge in its hands, and then simply appropriates these resources, uses them in a more efficient way, so they end up holding this exclusive monopoly over indigenous cultures. And the problem here is that these laws are often created by developed countries for developed countries. There's no restrictions on this rapid commercialization or commodification and use of genetic material like this. And another example is aping of the ayahuasca experience. Here we see a website of ayahuasca retreat reviews where they give 5-star ratings and cost compare these to see which retreat you can get the biggest bang for your buck. A quote to describe this is, "Westerners are shelling out large sums for experiences they are not well suited to fully understand or benefit from. They contribute to fetishization of cultures whose practices they wish to insinuate themselves into." So many people traveled on one of these retreats for a week, maybe a week and a half, to a completely foreign place to try a completely foreign substance, and then transplant themselves right back into their regular environment. And the problem here is it creates avenues for spiritual consumerism and exploitative tourism that's managed by Westerners lacking traditional knowledge themselves. So you're getting people who think that they're experts, but really don't know much more than any of us do about these indigenous cultures. And three, benefits. So communities are entitled to share in and benefit from the results of research and activities that use their knowledge. And this goes back to reparations as well. There's so many examples in history. We don't have to look far about how damaging colonialism has been and uh, is still damaging cultures now. And a recent example of this is the US-Mexico trade. So uh, Mexico is having a hard time meeting the high demand in the US for avocados. And as a result, they're destroying many of the forests to try to plant avocados to reach this demand. And this creates a long-term unsustainable market. So they're taking the precious resources like water away from local farmers to try to feed some of these farms. The ethical problem here is Western commercialization can cause these greedy businesses and even illegal cartels to overwhelm the local community and to destroy the biodiversity, leaving these places barren after a few years or a few decades. All right, enough with the ethical problems. Here's a few solutions to these. First is research self-awareness. This has three components: acknowledging your Western perspective, which is knowing uh, that we come from a system that often sees ourselves as superior than other cultures, and acknowledging indigenous autonomy, knowing that their laws, their values are as equally as important as ours, and acknowledging the disparities between them, knowing that we often function in the hierarchies, have historically seen them as less than, and we have to acknowledge trying to uh, even the playing field between Western culture and indigenous culture. And here's a quote uh, to recognize that Western culture isn't all bad. Western science offers important data, research, and expertise, but when it's tied together with indigenous sciences, it emboldens a highly collaborative response. Second is informed consent. Uh, this includes creative mutual agreements that are agreed upon before starting research, that includes an understanding of each other's laws, each party's responsibilities, potential benefits that may come from the research, and protection for the cultural heritage. And third is horizontal partnerships. And this means creating long-term relationships. So reparations means going back to these projects that have failed and trying to make amends with these communities and give them proper recognition. Benefits can take many forms, like royalties on projects or provisions of hospitals. Cultural recovery uh, can be building dictionaries for these languages that are endangered. And shared resources can include technology or provisions on new projects. And indigenous teachers, I think this is the most important. And I think indigenous teachers should be the ones to spearhead creating a more homogenized uh, practice of the field of ethnobotany within uh, the education system. So overall, research within this ethical framework has the potential to benefit the globalized world while also retaining the autonomy of indigenous cultures. I'd like to end with this quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer that I think also summarizes this um, very well. The Three Sisters offers us a new metaphor for an emerging relationship between indigenous knowledge and Western science, both of which are rooted in the earth. I think of the corn as the traditional ecological knowledge, the physical and spiritual framework that can guide the curious being of science, which twines like a double helix. The squash creates the ethical habitat for coexistence and mutual flourishing. I envision a time when the intellectual monoculture of science will be replaced with the polyculture of complementary knowledges, and so all may be fed. And here are my sources. Thank you for listening.